Welcome, dreamers, to the realm where sand remembers what time forgets. Tonight, we do not walk among noise or conflict, but drift gently through veils of mystery and silence. We travel to the golden breath of ancient Egypt, to a forgotten corner of history, where a single pharaoh defied the gods of 1,000 years, and in doing so, became a whisper, a riddle lost among the reeds of the Nile. Before we embark on this journey through time's mysteries, if these ancient whispers resonate with your soul, let your presence be known through a gentle like, and join our circle of dreamers by subscribing to continue these nightly journeys into history's hidden realms. Share with us, fellow dreamers, from which corner of the world you're joining tonight's contemplation. Let the global community of history's mysteries connect across time zones as we drift together into the past. Close your eyes and breathe in the scent of sun-warmed stone and myrrh. Let your thoughts fall away. Tonight, the sands shift to reveal the story of Akhenaten, the Heretic Pharaoh, and his hidden truth. Long before names like Akhenaten stirred the breeze of eternity, the Nile flowed in its ancient rhythm, carving a sacred artery through a land where time held no urgency. Papyrus swayed in quiet prayer along its banks, and sandstone temples glowed amber beneath the unblinking sun. Egypt, in this timeless age, was a hymn to order. The gods Amun-Ra, Osiris dwelt in harmony with the people's breath, and the pharaoh, the living Horus, was their divine bridge, unquestioned, eternal, and unchanging. Each reign followed the last like stars trailing across the night sky, predictable, reverent, and enclosed in the sacred circle of Mat, the cosmic balance. But even in the stillest dunes, change gathers like wind. Before he was called Akhenaten, there was a prince, a child of the great Amenhotep dynasty, with eyes too deep for comfort and thoughts that whispered against tradition. He was born Amenhotep IV, a name soaked in power and legacy. His father Amenhotep III was worshipped as a living god. His mother, Queen Tai, was wise, resolute, and unafraid to challenge the stewards of the old priesthood. The boy watched from golden halls. He listened, not to the ceremonies but to the spaces between them. He wandered through gardens of sycamore and lotus, asking questions not of men, but of the wind. Why must there be so many gods? Why must power be tangled in hidden rites? Why must the truth be cloaked in shadows? The desert gave no answer, but the sun above, that solitary, eternal sun, it gave warmth, it gave light, and to the boy's soul, it gave something more, a clarity that no statue or scroll could rival. The priests of Ammon ruled the temples of Thebes with gold and fear. Their processions stirred awe, their words shaped policy, but to the young prince, they felt distant, obscured, like reflections in disturbed water. In his dreams, the prince saw a different god, one not hidden behind veils of incense, but blazing openly across the sky. The Aten, a radiant disk, a giver of life, a silent witness. The boy said nothing aloud, but the seeds of heresy were already in bloom beneath his ribs. He would grow, he would ascend, and the winds of Egypt would shift. But for now, the sands were still. The moment of ascension came like a hush before the storm. Amenhotep IV stepped into his father's throne, not yet the heretic, not yet the dreamer who would rewrite the stars, but already, beneath the linen of ceremony and duty, he was different. He did not thunder into power with conquest or spectacle. Instead, he watched, he pondered, he studied the bones of the old world with silent precision. Thebes, heart of the old gods, pulsed with ritual. Each wall, every pylon and statue, bore the image of Ammon the high priest, moved like shadows wrapped in incense, whispers curling from their mouths like smoke from sacred fires. They expected another obedient vessel, a young king in the mold of many before him. They did not see the tide rising at their feet. In his first years as pharaoh, Amenhotep IV allowed tradition to play its part. He oversaw offerings. He stood beside the towering colossi of his father's memory. He smiled during festivals where the crowd chanted praises to a pantheon he no longer believed in. But in the privacy of his thoughts, in scrolls penned with trembling ink, he began to name the Aten, not as one of many, but as the one, a god not made in man's image, but in light itself, formless, faceless, and pure. No idol, no statue, only the disk, and its rays ending in hands that touched all life. And so the tension grew, like a harp string drawn tight. To the priests, it was a subtle discord at first. A new hymn here, a missing statue there. But in those quiet alterations, a revolution was breathing. The court stirred uneasily. Whispers clung to sandstone like dust. The pharaoh no longer built temples for Amen. He no longer knelt before the old gods. Instead, he built shrines open to the sky, where sunlight, not shadow, was sovereign. And he wrote hymns to the Aten, not as mere offerings, but as devotions from the soul. This was not politics. This was belief, a fire, born in dreams, now licking at the pillars of eternity. Yet it was not only gods he challenged, but beauty itself. Statues began to shift, faces lengthened, lips soft, Eyes widened unnaturally. Art changed. The perfect symmetry of Egypt's aesthetic was undone, as if the world itself was being reimagined in another shape, a shape truer to spirit than to flesh. And still, Amenhotep IV smiled. The world would soon know him by a new name, a name that would ripple through millennia with mystery. Akhenaten, he who is useful to the Aten, but, for now, the name rested softly on the horizon, waiting for the sun to rise. It was not a coronation that birthed the heretic pharaoh, but a shedding, a letting go, a soft and deliberate unbinding of old names, old gods, old truths. When he declared his transformation, the temples fell silent. Amenhotep IV was no more. He emerged as Akhenaten, a name not rooted in lineage, but in devotion. He who is pleasing to the Aten, he who walks in the light. And with this name came a dream, drawn not from conquest or wealth, but from vision. Akhenaten saw a city that did not yet exist, a place untouched by old loyalties, unburdened by tradition, a city carved from sunlight and stillness, a home for truth. The priests of Amen bristled, their temples grew quiet, their power, once absolute, now trembled in the face of a god without form, a god without priests. But Akhenaten did not argue. He did not declare war. Instead, he turned his back on Thebes and walked into the desert. There, between two cliffs on the eastern horizon, a place where the sun first kissed the land. Each morning he claimed a new beginning. He named it the horizon of the Otam. There would be no temples of shadow here, only open courtyards, bare sanctuaries, and walls that drank in the morning light. The city grew not from stone alone, but from poetry, from the conviction of one man who believed the divine was not many, but one, not cloaked, but radiant, not feared, but loved. The builders came, the artists followed, families, scribes, workers, and dreamers all flowed into this new oasis of belief. Akhetaten rose quickly, as if the very sun urged it forward. Whitewashed walls gleamed like alabaster. Palaces opened into gardens, and atop every lintel, the sun disk reigned supreme. Here, Akhenaten lived, not as a distant god-king, but as a devotee. O living Aten, beginning of life, when you rise upon the horizon, all lands are bathed in your beauty. He walked among his people. He played with his daughters. He embraced a kind of divine simplicity that left the old world stunned and uncertain. To some, he was mad. To others, a prophet. But to Akhenaten himself, he was only a servant of the light. The old gods were still worshipped in secret corners of Egypt. But in Akhetaten, the past had no place. Only the present, bathed in sun. And so, in the heat of that sacred dream, the pharaoh breathed deeply, not just of air, but of possibility. For now, the city thrived, the shadows receded, and the sun ruled alone. Where the sun shone most brightly in Akhetaten, there walked a queen whose name echoed like perfume through eternity. Nefertiti. Her name means the beautiful one has come. And indeed, she arrived not merely with but with a presence that stirred stone and sky alike. Nefertiti was no silent consort. She stood beside Akhenaten, not in shadow, but in full brilliance, depicted in carvings as his equal. She offered to the Aten with arms lifted high, her face serene, her posture commanding. Together, they were a vision of divine union, the Sun King and his Queen of Light. In the temples of Akhetaten, they were the only intermediaries between the people and the sun. No priest, no oracle, only them. In frescoes, they are shown tenderly holding their children, kissing their daughters beneath the rays of Aten, their family enfolded in light. Gone were the rigid, formal depictions of kings and queens past, in their placentinity, movement, warmth. The old gods had stood alone in darkness. Now, divinity played in the garden. Now, the royal household became the altar, and Nefertiti, she was not content to remain in the background. She wore the crown of Upper and Lower Egypt, led ceremonies, even struck down enemies in ritual scenes once reserved only for kings. Some whispered she ruled with Akhenaten as co-regent, some believed she was more than mortal, a goddess incarnate. But who was she truly? Even now scholars peer into the past, hoping to glimpse the truth behind her painted eyes. Her origins remain veiled, her end unclear. But in Akhetaten, she was the beating heart beside the heretic pharaoh. Together, they defied the weight of centuries. Together they've tried to sculpt a new cosmos from dust and faith. And under the gaze of the ever-watching sun they danced, not for legacy, but for light. Their love, their faith, their rebellion, it shimmered like a mirage upon the stone, real, radiant, and fleeting. A city born not from war or necessity, but from devotion. It rose like a lotus from the desert, petal by petal unfolding beneath the sun's gaze. Here, nothing was hidden. The temples had no ceilings. The walls were low, as though even stone dared not interrupt the Aten's descent. Every morning, the city awakened not with bells or trumpets, but with golden silence. The first light touched the eastern cliffs, then spilled across the alabaster homes, flooding courtyards, warming gardens, illuminating life itself. Unlike the labyrinthine temples of Thebes, Akhetaten breathed. Its design was open, inviting the light to pass through every corridor, to sanctify every corner. In the House of the Sun, Akhenaten would walk slowly, barefoot on polished floors, his robes fluttering like shadows behind him. He did not conceal himself behind curtains or armed guards. He was visible, vulnerable, bathed in the same sun that warmed peasants and scribes alike. The city's layout was a hymn of architecture. The great temple of the Aten stretched like arms toward the horizon, its columns simple, unadorned, its altars open to the heavens. Nearby stood the royal palace, a fusion of marble quiet and fragrant gardens. Pools reflected the sun's disk, and birds sang in papyrus reeds, as if nature itself had been summoned to sing praises to the one God. Artisans etched the city's glory in sun-baked limestone. They carved the royal family not in rigid divinity, but in play, laughing children, affectionate parents, a queen feeding her daughter, a pharaoh kissing his wife. This was not a world of distant gods and stone masks. It was intimate, lived in, bathed in warmth, but it was also fragile. Akhetaten flourished quickly, yet always felt like a dream. Its foundations were firm, but its purpose, its soul, hovered like dust above the sand. For outside its sacred boundaries, the old world still watched. The priests of Amen simmered in Thebes. The generals paced restlessly in Memphis. The people still whispered ancient names behind closed doors. But for now, in this shimmering cradle between cliffs and sky, Akhenaten's vision burned bright. A city not of power, but of purity. A kingdom not of stone, but of sunlight. And every evening, as the Aten dipped below the desert's edge, the city exhaled, and for a moment, the whole world paused in golden reverence. In the stillness of Akheten's nights, when the sandstone cooled beneath a silver sky, a different kind of offering rose. Not smoke, not sacrifice, but song. Akhenaten did not merely worship the Aten. He spoke to it. He sang of it. He wrote of it with a trembling pen of. From his palace chambers came verses unlike anything the scribes had etched before. No oaths to thunderous gods of judgment. No invocations of the underworld's cold gatekeepers. Only love. Only light. Only the warm embrace of the living sun. The great hymn to the Aten, his masterpiece, was not a decree, but a whisper. A lullaby to the universe. It began at dawn. As the golden disk emerged from the horizon, bringing life to all it touched. You rise in perfection on the horizon of the sky. Living Aten, creator of life. He wrote of the birds stirring from their nests, of cattle lifting their heads, of flowers unfolding beneath his God's rays. No land, no creature, no soul was beyond the Aten's light. Where old hymns sang of vengeance and favor, Akhenaten's words wove a theology of presence, of a God who needed no temple, only open sky. Each stanza was a breath, each line a beam of radiance drawn in script. The hymn described distant lands, Nubians in the south, Asiatics in the north, all receiving life from the same light. Unity, not in culture, not in conquest, but in illumination. The Aten became the silent observer of all things, without judgment, without idols, without hierarchy. Akhenaten's words were revolutionary, not through violence but through clarity. They echoed through Akhetaten's corridors, pinned gently to the walls of tombs, sung softly by scribes and schoolchildren beneath the sun. In these hymns, there was no afterlife, a peril, or reward. No weighing of the heart, only the gift of now, the sacredness of breath, the miracle of warmth, the embrace of day. To live was to be in the Aten. And as the pharaoh whispered his verses into the shifting dusk, he smiled, not as a king ruling over others, but as a man lost in reverence. In the world Akhenaten imagined, even art surrendered to the sun. It no longer served to immortalize rigid glory, but to capture something more elusive. Truth. Traditional Egyptian art, for centuries, had been unchanging, a sacred formula, a grid of divine posture and perfect symmetry. Pharaohs were always idealized, muscular, youthful, eternal. But in the city of the Eight, the rules dissolved like morning mist. Akhenaten's new style was startling, to some even unsettling. He was portrayed with an elongated skull, narrow limbs, a protruding belly, hips that curved like the mother goddess. No longer the warrior king of falcon and chariot, he now appeared soft, contemplative, almost vulnerable. Some whispered deformity, others spoke of symbolism. Was he depicting himself as both male and female, as the complete vessel of creation, mirroring the Aten's boundless nature? No one truly knows. But this transformation spread beyond the pharaoh. Queens and daughters were rendered with tender realism, graceful, fluid, deeply human. In carved scenes, they embraced beneath cascading rays, their limbs intertwined, their smiles delicate and unscripted. One image showed the royal couple sharing a quiet kiss, their child nestled between them, while the rays of Aten reached down like fingers, each ending in a tiny hand, blessing the moment. It was art not for legacy, but for life. for joy, for presence. The old gods looked on with stone faces, unchanged for centuries, as Akhenaten's artists broke free from their tradition's sacred rhythm. Scribes and sculptors, once bound by ancestral grids, now painted motion, etched laughter, revealed sorrow. They showed the royal family weeping, rejoicing, embracing. Not gods above men, but humans lit by divinity. Even the city's murals pulsed with warm tones, ochres, golds, burnt reds, echoing the colors of sunrise and clay. In every brushstroke, a god not but present a pharaoh, not armored, but unveiled. And the artists, inspired by this radical grace, breathed their own souls into stone and pigment. Akhetaten became not just a city, but a canvas. Not just a capital, but a revelation. And though time would one day erase its walls, the spirit of its art, its honesty, its tenderness would remain etched not only in museums, but in the quiet wonder of those who glimpse divinity in the ordinary. Even in a city built for the sun, the shadows eventually return. For though Akhetaten glowed with spiritual clarity, the world beyond its borders moved to older rhythms, to war, to fear, to gods who did not vanish. In Thebes, the temples of Ammon still loomed like thunder. Though the pharaoh had turned his face from them, they remained filled with priests who waited, silently seething beneath their white robes. In Memphis, the military generals watched uneasily. Akhenaten had withdrawn from foreign campaigns. He sent no armies to the distant edges of the empire. Enemies stood in Hatti and Kush. Allies grew nervous. The outer edges of Egypt, once firm under the gaze of divine kingship, now felt neglected, and within Akhetaten itself, the seeds of doubt began to tremble. Not all had come to worship the Aten. Many came for opportunity, for favor, for necessity. They chanted the new hymns. They offered to the open sky. But in quiet corners, they whispered the names of older gods: Osiris, Isis, Thoth, Horus. The streets still shimmered in the morning light, but beneath them, a murmur grew. It was not rebellion, not yet, but a homesickness for what had once been sacred, for the comfort of the old stories, the familiar silence of ancestral gods. And then there were the tombs. Akhenaten had rejected the old beliefs of the afterlife. There would be no weighing of the heart, no journey through Duat, no judgment by Osiris. In the city of Aten there was no book of the dead, only the light of today. But humans still feared what lay beyond the veil, still longed for assurance that death was not emptiness. In tombs carved into the cliffs beyond Akhetaten, the murals told a different tale, conflicted, uncertain. Some walls sang only of the Aten, others, in secret corners, bore faint images of the old gods, painted lightly, as if in hesitation, as if the artists were unsure who watched. Akhenaten's dream, though radiant, was beginning to show its fragility. A city can rise in a year, but a new soul for a civilization, that takes lifetimes, and he was only one man, walking alone in the sun. Beyond the luminous walls of Akhetaten, the empire grew quiet, not in peace, but in uncertainty. Like a river diverted from its source, its currents slowed, its edges frayed. The diplomatic networks, once vibrant under Akhenaten's father, began to wither. Messages from foreign kings, carved into clay and carried across desert and sea, arrived in growing desperation. From the Levant, pleas came. The enemies press at our gates, send archers, send aid. From QAnon we remain your servants, but we are afraid. Where is Egypt's strength? Akhenaten did not answer. Or perhaps he chose silence as a form of devotion. For, in his view, what was empire compared to eternity? He had become inward, seeking not dominion, but purity. And in doing so, he let the outer world slip quietly away. The generals grumbled. Ambassadors returned unanswered. Vassals defected. Egypt's borders, once carved in stone, began to blur in the desert wind. And yet, within Akhetaten, the sun still rose. The city still glowed with poetry and light. To its citizens, there was no panic, only quiet. But in that quiet, the kind that settles before a sandstorm, was a kind of unease. Even the royal court began to fracture. Some members faded into obscurity. Others disappeared entirely from records. And Nefertiti, the radiant queen who had once stood shoulder to shoulder with the king, suddenly vanished from view. Was she exiled? Did she die? Or did she change? Some believe she assumed a new name, a new role. Perhaps she ruled briefly in her own right, a shadow pharaoh beneath the burning disk. But the records are veiled, damaged, or deliberately erased. Akhenaten, too, grew more distant. Once the poet king among the people, he became quieter. His gaze fixed ever more skyward. His health waned. His figure grew more gaunt. He walked more slowly through the open courtyards. The Aten still shone above, unmoving, unchanging, but below, the dream had begun to flicker. Akhenaten had silenced the empire, but silence, too long kept, becomes a kind of forgetting. And Egypt was beginning to forget him. There is no grand monument to mark the death of no golden mosque, no towering pyramid. No elaborate tomb bursting with treasures to defy eternity. Only silence. Only mystery. One day, he simply faded from the scrolls, from the temples, from the very language of Egypt. No triumphal procession followed his final breath. No mourners lined the streets in ritual grief. Even the date of his passing, like so much of his life, was left unanchored. Some believe he was buried hastily in the cliffs near Akhetaten in a tomb barely begun, its walls echoing with unfinished prayers. Others say he was moved, perhaps to Thebes, perhaps nowhere. No one knows for certain. His successors would not preserve him, they would not sing his hymns, they would not remember him with reverence. Instead, they would begin the great But before that tide returned, there was still one last breath in the sacred city. Akhetaten, though weathered and unsure, remained intact for a little while longer. The sun still rose. The pigeons still fluttered in open courtyards. The children still chased shadows on warm stone. But the light had changed. It no longer glowed with revelation, but with a kind of fading echo, like the last warmth of sunset before the desert cold sets in. Without its dreamer, the city began to forget its purpose. The artisans left. The poets fell silent. The workers packed their tools and followed the currents of the Nile back to the cities of old gods, and the temples of Aten, once filled with golden hymns and open sky, stood quiet. Soon, Akhetaten would be abandoned, its walls left to crumble under wind and time, its name buried beneath layers of sand and centuries of erasure. But for a moment, a brief flicker in the vastness of history, a man had dreamed not of conquest, but of clarity. He had believed in a god without face. He had sung of light instead of fear. He had reimagined what it meant to be divine. And though the world turned away, though even his name would be forgotten for thousands of years, still, his dream had touched the horizon. And the sun, as it always does, continued to rise. After the dreamer's death, the world rushed back in like a tide long held at bay. The old gods, silent only in appearance, returned not with battle cries, but with a quiet vengeance. The temples of Amen reopened. Their incense once again curled through the sacred halls. Their hymns, never truly forgotten, rose like embers rekindled from slumber. The priests emerged from the shadows, robes heavy with memory, voices sharpened by restraint. They erased Akhenaten not with swords, but with chisels. His name was struck from every monument, his cartouches gouged from stone, his statues shattered, his hymns buried, his city left to the desert. This was not merely political, it was ritual. To the guardians of tradition, Akhenaten had not just erred, he had unbalanced the sacred order. He had insulted the very fabric of Mat, the cosmic harmony, and so they restored it, stone by stone, decree by decree. Under the rule of a young boy Tutankhaten, the past was but even his name did not remain. The boy king was soon renamed Tutankhamun, living image of Amun. The Aten was no longer spoken of in public. Its temples were dismantled, its altars were, and the city of light was left to the vultures and wind. Its homes collapsed in silence, its grand avenues filled with drifting sand. The erasure was thorough, but not complete. In dusty tombs, a few inscriptions remained. A broken hymn, a carved sun disk too faint to remove, a face in profile elongated, strange, human, half buried in rubble. The memory could not be killed, only buried. And centuries later, when archaeologists brushed away the dust of forgetting, they would uncover a story so different, so luminous, that it defied the rhythm of kings and conquests. They would find the traces of a man who sought truth not in temples, but in sunlight. A heretic to his peers, a mystery to us. And though the old gods reclaimed their altars, and though the Aten was cast back into silence, Akhenaten's vision still shimmered, in fragments, in whispers, in questions without end. Among all the riddles left behind in the sun-swept ruins of Akhetaten, one stands taller than the rest, more delicate than stone, more enduring than inscription. Where did Nefertiti go? She who had stood beside Akhenaten in devotion, in reform, in radiant defiance, vanished. There was no grand burial, no stela carved in remembrance, no record of her death. She simply like twilight dissolving into night. And so, dreamers and scholars have wondered ever since. Some say she died young, struck by illness or fate, leaving the king to grieve in silence beneath the indifferent sun. Others believe her name changed, and with it, her role. There is a theory softly whispered through scroll-lined halls, that Nefertiti became Smenkhare, a mysterious co-ruler who appears briefly, like a shadow at the edge of flame, before vanishing once more. Could she have ruled Egypt in her husband's final years, guiding the Aten's fading flame as Akhenaten withdrew into his inner sanctum? Or was she pushed aside? Was her devotion to the Aten not enough? Or was her power, her influence, a threat to others in the court who longed for the return of the old ways? There are clues, but they are fragments. A painted mural with her figure missing, a statue base where her name was once carved, now scraped clean. And then there is the mask, not hers, but the one found in Tutankhamun's tomb. delicate, golden, exquisite beyond words. Some scholars believe it was made for her. Its features are not those of a boy king but of a woman. Strong god, regal, serene. Could this be the final echo of Nefertiti repurposed, hidden in plain sight? If so, she sleeps in eternity beneath a name not her own. Or perhaps her tomb is yet undiscovered, buried beneath the desert's breath, sealed in silence, waiting for the sun to touch it once more. We do not know, and perhaps that is as it should be. For Nefertiti, more than a queen, more than a name, has become a symbol of mystery, of grace, of forgotten power. She is the silhouette in the temple light, the voice in a forgotten hymn, the curve of stone too delicate to crumble. Wherever she is, she remains just beyond reach, an enigma carved in sunlight. In the twilight years of Akhetan's fading glory, a new figure stepped forward from the mists of history. Brief, ambiguous, and cloaked in uncertainties. A brother to Akhenaten, a son, a co-regent, or was Smenkhare none other than Nefertiti herself, cloaked in a new identity, ruling as king rather than queen. The records are fractured, papyrus lost, tombs left incomplete, inscriptions broken but from the fragments, a shape begins to emerge, delicate, uncertain, but insistent. Smenkhare appears alongside Akhenaten in some depictions, offering to the Aten standing beneath the radiant disk. He wears the regalia of kingship, the crook and flail, the double crown, yet the features carved into some surviving images are soft, elegant, almost feminine, too much so, some say, to be mere coincidence. Others argue otherwise. Perhaps Smenkhare was a son of Akhenaten, raised quickly to power in a time of political fragility. Perhaps he was placed beside the aging king to strengthen the throne as the empire trembled. But the truth eludes us. Like a reflection in rippling water, the image of Smenkhare shifts with every interpretation. What we do know is this: Smenkhare's reign was brief, perhaps a year, perhaps even less. And when he or she was gone, another took the throne, the boy king who would undo the revolution and guide Egypt back to the gods of its forebears. But in the hush between Akhenaten and Tutankhamun, a ghost monarch whose story refuses to be fully told. Perhaps, in the sacred logic of Akhenaten's dream, this was fitting. The age of the Aten had never been about names carved in permanence. It had been about light, fluid, fleeting, divine, and Smenkhare, whoever they were, was one final shimmer, before the sun slipped below the edge of time. From the ashes of Akhenaten's revolution, a child rose to the throne. His feet barely touched the ground when seated upon the great lion-backed chair, but the weight upon his shoulders was the weight of centuries. He was born Tutankhaten, a name woven from the new order, a name that honored the radiant sun god. But soon, his name would change, as the world around him did. Tutankhamen a return, a restoration, a symbol of the gods. The court around him bristled with new energy, or perhaps old energy reborn. The high priests of Amen, once silenced, returned in flowing processions. The temples of the old gods reopened their mouths in song. The stoneworkers carved again the faces of Osiris, of Thoth, of Isis, and the city of Akhetaten was abandoned. The boy king did not choose this path. He was but a thread woven by hands older and more powerful than his own. Yet even as the wheel of tradition turned, Tutankhamen carried remnants of his father's dream. He had been born in the house of the sun. He had walked the courtyards of Akhetaten. He had seen the paintings of laughter and light, felt the golden quiet of temples without roofs, and perhaps, in the privacy of night, he remembered. He reigned only briefly, a decade at most, but in that time, he oversaw not just the revival of the old ways, but the quiet burial of the new. The temples to Aten were dismantled stone by stone, his statues broken, his hymns silenced. The Aten returned to the sky, untouched, but unspoken. And Tutankhamen, so young, so gentle, became a symbol not of rebellion, but of reconciliation. When he died, his tomb was small, hastily prepared. But unlike his father, he was remembered. And one day, long after the sands had swallowed the Valley of the Kings, his tomb would be found, intact, radiant. And he would become the face of Egypt to the modern world. But in his time, he was the one who bore the burden of two worlds colliding, of dreams and gods and names all shifting like dunes beneath his feet. And perhaps, as he lay beneath his golden mask, the boy who had once been Tutankhaten dreamed of a city where the sun reigned without walls, and the divine was felt in light. When a city is forgotten, it does not vanish all at once. It breathes more slowly. Its walls do not fall in a single night. They listen first, to silence. So it was with once a gleaming city of open-air temples and radiant homes. It now stood as a ghost in the golden hush of the desert. The people had gone, the scribes, the sculptors, the courtiers, all scattered like birds startled from a tree. Their chants had ceased. Their brushstrokes ended midline. Even the royal tombs, carved into the cliffs beyond the city, remained unfinished. Chisels were laid down and never retrieved. Paintings halted, with hands and faces half-drawn, as if the soul of the place had simply evaporated. The Aten's sacred city was not destroyed, it was not conquered, it was left. Abandonment, in its own way. It's a kind of quiet violence, more insidious than flame, more permanent than war. The homes fell to dust. The pillars cracked beneath sun and time. Sand drifted slowly down the avenues, like a second skin. Even the name was buried. Akhetaten became Tela Lumana, a whisper, a mound, a riddle. Centuries passed. New kings came, new temples rose, new stories were told along the Nile. But Akhetaten slept, and yet, though it was erased from memory, its soul remained. For the desert does not forget. It holds its secrets not in silence, but in waiting. And when the archaeologists came, digging with cautious hands and wide eyes, they found a world untouched. Letters still sealed in clay, tools still resting on stone ledges, fragments of prayer still clinging to faded walls. Here was no tale of battle, no narrative of conquest or collapse. Only a departure, a city built for the light, left behind in the dark, and within it a question, a shimmering, unanswerable question. What if Akhenaten had been right? What if a god could be felt in the warmth of morning, in the breath of sky, in the tender light between moments? The city was gone, but the question remained, and that, perhaps, was Akhenaten's true legacy. Among the dust-covered ruins of Akhetaten, archaeologists found more than walls and statues. They found voices, quiet, urgent, unanswered. In a chamber near the heart of the city, beneath broken beams and crumbling stone, lay acacia clay tablets, hundreds of them, baked hard by the sun, inscribed in the wedge-shaped script of Akkadian, the language of diplomacy. These were the Amana letters, messages sent from faraway kings and vassals from Babylonia, Mitanni, Heretic. The world had once spoken to Egypt, and it had spoken directly to The letters were not poems or praises, but pleas, requests for aid, gifts, reassurance. Some begged for gold, others cried for soldiers. Why have you not replied? Why does the pharaoh ignore us? Our cities are under attack, send chariots, or we are lost. The words were etched with desperation, leaders clinging to a tether that was fraying fast. And yet, they remained unopened. Unanswered. Was Akhenaten different, or was he absorbed in his vision, unable, unwilling to turn from his spiritual revolution to the crumbling of alliances? Perhaps he believed diplomacy, like everything else, must yield to divine clarity. Or perhaps he underestimated how swiftly silence can become collapse. The letters tell of a world beyond Akhetaten, a world unraveling. The vassal states rebelled. The balance of power shifted like desert dunes. But within the golden courtyards of the Sun City, life continued, unmoved by the storm. These tablets, never delivered, never answered, became the final echoes of an empire's fading breath. For the first time, Egypt had turned inward. It had become a mirror instead of a window, and in doing so, it lost sight of the hands reaching out across the sand. The Amana letters now rest in museums, fragile and cracked, but still whispering. We wrote to the pharaoh, but he did not write back. 1,000 voices frozen in clay, and among them, the ghost of a dream too bright to last. For centuries after his death, Akhenaten's face was lost to time. No triumphant bust adorned the temples. No great statue stood in his name. He was a monarch buried twice, first in silence, then in sand. And yet, his image endured, not in celebration, but in contradiction. To some later Egyptians, he was a villain, the one who defied Mat, who desecrated the gods, who led Egypt into weakness. To others, he was a madman, deluded by visions, reckless in faith, unaware of the empire crumbling at his feet. And still, to a few, he was a prophet, a soul who glimpsed a deeper truth and paid the price for seeing too far. But how does one remember a man whose memory was meant to be destroyed? When 19th century archaeologists began uncovering the ruins of Tel El, they found a puzzle of broken stone and forgotten names, strange statues with elongated heads, mysterious hymns to a faceless god, an entire city that appeared and disappeared like a mirage at first. Even his name confused them. Was he a king or a priest? Why did no other pharaohs speak of him? Then the busts began to emerge. One showed a man with narrow eyes, prominent lips, and a gaze both serene and unsettling. Another revealed limbs outstretched in prayer, sun rays ending in tender hands. The image was unmistakable. This was no ordinary king. More than historians poring over the fragments still debate his mind, his motives, his meaning. Was Akhenaten the first monotheist in recorded history? Did his vision influence, however faintly, the spiritual evolutions that came after? Or was he simply one more figure swept by the winds of empire, crushed beneath the wheel of tradition? His image, once erased, now invites endless reflection. Some see wisdom, some see arrogance, most see a mystery, and in a way that is fitting, Akhenaten did not seek to be worshipped. He sought to reveal the divine in what was already present, the warmth of the sun, the beauty of life, the holiness of now. He remains, even today, an enigma in profile, carved in shadow and light, neither fully understood nor fully forgotten, a face turned eternally toward the sky, Though the temples were torn down and the hymns silenced, the Aten was never truly gone. It lingered not in grand monuments, but in quieter places, a symbol, a whisper, a forgotten breath of something once radiant. In later centuries, no pharaoh claimed its light, no priest knelt beneath its invisible throne. But still, the idea had been spoken, that there could be one divine force, not clothed in form, not limited by myth, but everywhere present in the warmth that touches all life. Akhenaten had said it plainly, though wrapped in poetry. You are in my heart, and there is no other who knows you. It was not just a theology. It was a feeling of reverence without idol, of devotion without fear. This was radical but also deeply intimate, and even though Egypt turned away from this flame, the ember remained. Centuries later, as other civilizations rose, others too would speak of a single divine light in different names, in different tongues, but with the same inward gaze. Perhaps Akhenaten's vision did not end in ruin. Perhaps it was simply too early, too new, too clear for an age of shadowed gods. The Aten's last echo was not in a tomb, but in an idea, a truth that cannot be buried, that holiness might dwell, not in statues, but in sunlight, not in sacrifice, but in awareness, that the divine may not be thunder or command, but presence. Presence in the warmth of a new day, in the hush between words, in the light that touches rich and poor alike. This was not just a revolution of gods, it was a revolution of the soul. And so, the Aten waits, not in history books, but in the soft glint across a quiet stream, in the hush of morning light falling through curtains, in the stillness that sometimes whispers, there is more than what we see. There is light, there is always light. And in it, the echo of a dream sung by a heretic king long forgotten by the world, but remembered by the sky. Centuries passed, empires rose and fell like the Nile in flood. Sand swallowed stories, temples turned to hills, the names of kings became syllables without meaning. And yet, beneath it all, Akhetaten waited, not for glory, not for vengeance, but simply to be seen. In the late 19th century, curious eyes and steady hands began peeling back the veil of time. The mountain now called Tel El was more than a ruin. It was a doorway, a buried breath of a forgotten dream. The archaeologists came with shovels and notebooks, expecting ruins, but finding something far stranger. Streets aligned with celestial care, open-air temples defying all traditional design, homes painted not with war, but with flowers, laughter, and sun rays ending in delicate hands. They uncovered palace floors still bearing the footprints of servants who had walked them thousands of years ago. They uncovered letters, not myths or laws, but human voices calling out through time. They uncovered statues, elongated, unfamiliar, neither god nor man, but something in between. And they found names, Akhenaten, Nefertiti, but not from memory. Each discovery brought questions. Each question brought more mystery. Why was this city built so quickly? And why was it so suddenly abandoned? Why did the art speak of tenderness in an age of power? Why did the king defy the gods that had ruled Egypt for 2,000 years? The archaeologists could not answer all these questions, but in brushing away the dust, they awakened the world to the existence of a man who had dared to dream differently. Today, Akhetaten is still quiet. There are no priests chanting, no kings offering golden bowls to the rising sun. Only wind, only fragments, only light playing across broken columns. But as the sun rises each morning, just as it did in Akhenaten's time, its warmth still touches the ancient stones, still casts long shadows across the city that once was. And in that light, gentle, golden, unchanged, the dream flickers once more, not dead, only sleeping, awaiting another awakening. The sun that Akhenaten worshipped still rises over the hills of Amarna, as it always has, unchanging, unmoved by empire, unfazed by the passing of kings. Its light has touched the granite faces of old gods, the golden mask of Tutankhamun. It has illuminated war and peace, faith and silence, reverence and rebellion. And yet, it is not the sun that has changed. It is we who shift, we who forget, we who return with new eyes to the same golden light. Akhenaten saw something there, something most could not. A stillness behind the brightness, a divine rhythm in its daily journey. A god without image, without face, without form, but not without presence. He sought not to own it, but to align with it, not to rule by it, but to walk beneath it in wonder. He cast aside the gods of thunder and vengeance, the temples of secrets and smoke, and stood before the open sky, arms outstretched, waiting for the light. Was it madness, or was it clarity? Even now, we cannot say, but when we close our eyes and feel the warmth of the morning sun upon our skin, when we notice the silence between moments, the radiance of a flower, the breath of wind that feels both ancient and immediate, perhaps, then, we understand a fragment of what he tried to speak. Akhenaten was a pharaoh, yes, but more than that. He was a question carved into time, a challenge to tradition, a whisper of possibility. He left behind no empire of stone, no lineage that endured, only a city that crumbled, and an idea that refused to be buried, that there is holiness in simplicity, that there is unity in light, that what we seek has been shining above us all along. The sun does not need a name. It needs only to be seen. And tonight, as we drift into the realm of dreams, perhaps we too can walk the sacred courtyards of Akhetaten, quiet, open, bathed in gold, and feel for a moment a piece of a truth unspoken, but eternal. Legacy is often measured in monuments, in conquests, in names that thunder across ages. But Akhenaten's legacy whispers. It moves gently, like wind through reeds. It flickers, like sunlight on water. It is not found in the annals of victorious kings, nor in the towering columns of Karnak, nor even in the echoes of dynasties that followed. It is found in fragments, a hymn left unfinished, a broken statue with unfamiliar eyes, a city erased, yet not forgotten. And still, his legacy breathes, not as doctrine, but as wonder. For, in a world of gods with weapons, Akhenaten gave the world a god with no face, only light, only warmth, only presence. He stripped away the myths until all that remained was a sky. This was not rebellion. This was revelation. His priests were poets. His temples were open air. His offerings were not blood, but gratitude. The Aten gave no laws, made no demands. It simply shone, and Akhenaten, in choosing it, invited all to dwell in that shining stillness. He saw divinity in the now, not in death, not in judgment, but in this moment, this breath. That is his true legacy. And though the statues are broken, and though his name was carved out of stone in time, we remember him still. Not because he ruled, not because he changed Egypt, but because he dreamed, and he dared to let that dream become a city. Akhetaten may have fallen, but the dream it held, that divinity is as near as sunlight, that still lingers, not in history books, but in the quiet between thoughts, in the peace that rises when we stop seeking and simply feel the warmth on our skin. His legacy is not loud. It will never demand. It will only glow, scattered among the cliffs that cradle the Nile. There lie tombs that were meant to hold eternity, carved into stone, painted with care, filled with dreams of a journey beyond. But in the hills of Amarna, many of those tombs remain unfinished, empty, silent, not because death did not come, but because history changed direction. The nobles of Akhetaten, those who had cast their fortunes with the Heretic king, had begun to prepare their resting places. Their names were inscribed, their praises to the Aten, carved with reverence, their lives captured in scenes of devotion and domestic grace. But with Akhenaten's fall, so fell their hopes of eternal peace. Some tombs were abandoned, some were repurposed, some were the walls, once adorned with gentle rays of sunlight, were scarred by those who followed, those who returned to older gods, older truths. In these forgotten tombs, we find neither grandeur nor gold, only dust, and fragments of a different vision. A scribe depicted mid-thought, his brush paused above the papyrus, a servant bringing fruit beneath the open sky, a mother and child bathed in rays from a faceless sun. No gods of jackal or falcon, no scales or weighing hearts, only life, held sacred. These tombs were not meant to impress, they were meant to remember. But memory can be delicate, and when the dream crumbled, the names faded too. Yet, centuries later, the earth opened once more. Archaeologists lit their lamps and found those unfinished walls waiting patiently in the dark, and on them not fear, not judgment, but quiet beauty. Perhaps that is the true miracle, that in a world so obsessed with power, some chose instead to carve love, to carve light, and though their resting places were never completed, their vision endured, not in gold, but in the dust that still holds warmth from a long-forgotten sun. Akhetaten was built for the sun, but not for time. Its walls rose swiftly, as if summoned by a dream, and fell just as fast, carried away by wind and silence. But perhaps that was the point. Akhenaten's city was never meant to last in stone. It was meant to last in memory, in questions, in the soft astonishment of a world dream. The old cities of Egypt, Thebes, Memphis, Abydos, they endure in grandeur, in monumental stone, in the weight of continuity. Akhetaten endures differently, like a breath, like a glimmer at the edge of a vision, like a song whose melody you cannot forget. Though the words are lost, it teaches not permanence, but presence, to live in alignment with the light, to speak not to appease gods of thunder, but to praise the beauty of the day itself, to love your children in the sunlight, to sing to the warmth of morning, to see the sacred in the ordinary. This was the heart of Akhenaten's dream, and like all dreams, it slipped away. But dreams, when true, leave traces. They ripple across generations. They echo not in palaces, but in the quiet spaces between. Akhetaten was a city without walls to the heavens, a city that prayed not through sacrifice, but through simplicity. And that simplicity, that deep, strange, luminous peace, is still felt in the stone foundations beneath Tel El Amarna, in the preserved hymns, in the delicate outlines of half-finished murals. And in us, because the world has always needed reminders that power is not the only path, that mystery, beauty, and stillness can be sacred too. Akhenaten's dream was never meant to conquer, it was meant to awaken. And though it passed, its light remains, not in permanence, but in poetry. She gazes still, not from a throne, not from a temple, but from a single sculpture, a bust that has become more eternal than any crown, Nefertiti. And she did come not only to her time, but somehow to ours. In 1912, buried beneath the dust of her likeness emerged, delicate, poised, exquisite in balance and grace, one eye unfinished, yet somehow more complete than any royal portrait that came before or after. She wears the blue crown, high and serene. Her jawline is soft, yet sure. Her lips curve with the quiet of someone who knows more than she speaks. She does not smile. She does not command. She simply is. And in that presence, we feel the echo of a world once lit with strange fire. A world where queens offer to a god of light, not in shadowed halls, but beneath open skies. The bust, though small, holds gravity. She has become a symbol of a time lost, a love erased, a revolution dissolved. Yet her gaze remains, unblinking, undiminished. We do not know how she died. We do not know where she lies. But her face has crossed the centuries with the silence of a whisper, too sacred to be forgotten. To some, she is beauty incarnate. To others, power in grace. But to those who listen deeper, she is a memory of light, a witness to Akhenaten's impossible dream, a partner in vision, a sovereign of belief. In museums, under controlled light and guarded glass, millions have stood before her, not speaking, just looking, as if, for a moment, we too are in the courtyards of Akhetaten, as if we too feel the warm breath of the sun disk overhead, as if we too have not entirely forgotten what it means to believe in something quiet, gentle, eternal. Her face may be sculpted from stucco and pigment, but her spirit, her presence, is made of dream, and dreams, when carved with truth, do not fade. What, then, was Akhenaten's truth? Not the Aten carved into walls, not the temples stripped of shadow, not even the city built for the sun. No. His truth was quieter still. It was not in what he did, but in what he saw, and what he chose to feel. That the sacred could be direct, unfiltered, unadorned. That the divine did not need to be bargained with, bribed with incense or gold, cloaked in stories passed down by priests. That perhaps it simply was. Akhenaten's hidden truth was that holiness was not above us, but within us. That the same light that warms the world also warms the heart. That the presence of something greater can be felt not in grand ceremonies, but in silence, in stillness, in light falling through a doorway at dawn. And for that belief, he was erased. Not because he was evil, not because he conquered, but because he refused the rhythm of things. He sang a different song, and though the choir was small, its notes have lingered. In some ways, he was not the first monotheist, nor even the first philosopher, but he was among the first to try and remake a world in alignment with the heart, with wonder, with the rhythms of the sky. His truth, obscured by time and fear, was that the divine is not far. It is here, in every breath, in every beam, in every gentle pause between what is and what could be. The world was not ready for his truth, and so it buried him. But buried truth has a way of blooming in the dark, and now, as we lie in stillness, drifting into the dream world, we may sense it again. That distant whisper, that warming hush, that echo of sunlight falling across ancient stone. He was called heretic, blasphemer, madman. But perhaps, just perhaps, he was right. Beneath the windswept hills of Tel el-Amarna, Akhetaten still sleeps. It does not shout, it does not rise in defiance. It rests, as all true dreams do, in the folds of memory and sand. Here, the streets once lined with open courtyards are traced now only by faint outlines. Stone foundations, dust-blown doorways, a palace floor worn smooth by footsteps long faded. No armies marched here, no wars were waged. This was a city of light, and like light, it passed. Yet in this stillness, there remained something sacred. The houses of the workers, modest and close together, once echoed with children's laughter. The scribes' quarters still cradle broken inkpots, the edges of their reed brushes petrified by time. A temple's threshold lies shattered, its altars quiet, but one can almost see the hands once lifted skyward, open not in fear, but in gratitude. Here was a place built not for empire, but for essence. Akhenaten had asked, what if we lived as if the divine were all around us? Not feared, but loved, not hidden, but visible in the warmth of morning. And for a brief breath in time, an entire city tried to live that answer. The people here woke each day not to serve a pantheon of veiled deities, but to offer praise to the life-giving light they could see, feel, and walk beneath. Their God was above them, and around them, and within them. And now, centuries later, when we look across these broken stones, we find not ruin but evidence of a different kind of strength. Not the permanence of granite, but the resilience of vision. But the soul of the place, it lingers, in golden flecks upon the cliffside, in the echoes of hymns chanted long ago, in the strange serenity that settles when the sun first touches stone. The city lies buried, but the dream is not gone, because once there was a man who believed that the sacred could be lived, and the city he built to hold that belief still speaks, softly, slowly, with the language of light. All through history, there are moments fleeting and luminous when someone dares to dream differently. They break from the path, they sing a new song, and for a brief, fragile moment, the world pauses to listen. Akhenaten was one such soul. He did not leave behind conquest or empire, but something more delicate, more enduring, a question, a shimmer, a turning of the head toward the sky. His time was brief, his legacy buried, his vision denied by those who feared its light. Yet even now, the questions he raised stir quietly beneath our modern world. What if the divine is not in rule, but in radiance? What if what we seek has always been around us, in sunlight through leaves, in the hush before dawn, in the warmth that greets us without condition? His truth was not meant for temples, it was meant for hearts. And while the world turned away, while history chose louder names and longer reigns, his dream remained invisible but persistent, because truth, when born of stillness, never fully dies. It hides, it waits, it returns. We see it in mystics who walk quietly through forests, in children who laugh for no reason beneath the sun. It is not doctrine, it is not structure, it is awareness. Akhenaten lived too early, too clearly, but his questions outlived his bones. And tonight, as we drift further into the calm dark, we carry those questions with us, soft, radiant, full of possibility. Perhaps his city is gone, perhaps his name was scratched away, but the truth he glimpsed, that wonder itself is sacred. That truth still rises with every dawn, like the sun, quiet, unstoppable, eternal. In the great scroll of time, where kings are etched in gold and conquest, Akhenaten's name is a faint, wandering line, brief, broken, but luminous. He was not the strongest, not the richest, not the most remembered, but he was the one who turned his face toward the sky and asked aloud, what if the light is enough? Others ruled through war, he ruled through wonder. Others built legacies of empire. He built a vision of presence, of peace, of praise without demand. He did not shout his truth, he whispered it in hymns in open-air temples, in the eyes of his daughters bathed in sunlight. He lost everything for that whisper, his city, his name, his place in the line of kings. But in losing, he left something no empire could claim, a moment in human history when someone dared to live not for glory, but for the sacredness of the everyday, to see the divine not behind veils and rituals, but in the quiet rhythm of life. The touch of warmth on skin, the dance of shadow and sun on stone, the stillness between breaths. This was his heresy. This was his truth. And though the world erased his name, it could not erase the sky. The Aten still raises. The light still pours into every corner, and somewhere in that golden silence, the soul of Akhenaten smiles. Not because he was remembered, but because he was real. Because he dreamed, and built, and believed. And even if time buried him, his light still lives. Let us close this story, not with an ending, but with a lullaby. The kind that rises with the dawn, soft as wind over water, ancient as the stones of the Nile. This is not the song of a king. It is not the cry of conquest or the boast of monuments. It is the hush of a soul surrendering to light. Akhenaten, dreamer of forgotten sons, whispered to the Aten not as a subject, but as a child. In his great hymn, he did not demand, he praised. He thanked the sun for its warmth, for its clarity, for the mystery of how it shines on all things equally. You are beautiful, great, radiant, high over all the earth, ... Double quotes. He did not claim dominion. He marveled at how the plants rise, how the birds sing, how the world lives because of one silent, steady glow. This was his lullaby to a god without anger, without judgment, without hidden face, a god that simply is, And in the hush of Akhetaten's nights, when the cliffs turned to shadow and the sky opened its velvet eye, perhaps he lay awake, hand upon stone, heart upon sky, and whispered those verses once more, not for others to hear, but for the silence to carry. Now, that song drifts to us, not loud, not proud, but enduring. It says, the sacred may not wear crowns, the sacred may not need temples. Sometimes, it is enough to look up and feel the warmth on your skin, to breathe, to rest, to remember that life itself is holy. This was his lullaby, and now, it is ours. Close your eyes, feel the gold behind your eyelids, and sleep, dreamer, in the light of a king who loved the sun. And now, gentle traveler, our journey through golden dust and sacred light comes to its resting place. We have wandered through the forgotten courtyards of Akhetaten, stood in the warmth of temples without roofs, listened to hymns meant not for gods of thunder, but for the soft and radiant rhythm of the sky. You have heard the story of a man who saw holiness in the ordinary, who gave his life to a vision that the world could not hold. Not all dreams endure in stone, not all truths survive in records, but some, the rarest ones, linger in the heart's quiet chambers, like the last echo of sunlight at dusk. Akhenaten, the Heretic, the dreamer, was never meant to be understood by the world he left behind. And yet, in our quiet contemplation, his light returns. Not as doctrine, not as empire, but as presence, as the stillness you feel now, as the calm that has unfolded through these whispered words, as the thought that perhaps you too have stood in light without knowing it. So, as sleep gathers around you, as your breath becomes deep and slow, know that you are part of a circle, a dreaming circle, linked not by power, but by wonder. Thank you for wandering with us tonight, through history's hidden corridors, through silence, sunlight, and time. If this story has brought you peace, let your presence be known through a gentle light, and join our circle of seekers by subscribing to The Dreaming Historian. Share with us, if you wish, from where in the world your journey began tonight, and let this constellation of dreamers shine softly across the globe. Sleep well now. May your dreams be touched by light, and your heart held in stillness, until the next whisper of the past. Good night.